Hi, my name is Chelsie Klassen, Global Director of Community Engagement and Social Performance at Hatch. In many projects, we think about E, S, and G. And E, being environmental, is looked at in a very prescriptive lens, and I think we know a lot about the E. We know a lot about the G, being auditing and governance and oversight from boards and shareholders. But the S is somewhat vague, which is social. And it's starting to be looked at a more frequent basis because it presents big risks to projects. I think if we look even around the globe, we've identified different areas that have a high risk on S. It's not always so prescriptive, we don't always know how to respond, but through experiences, through professionals, through practitioners, they've identified different ways to include people in projects. It's all about the people. In mining projects at the very front end now, it's important to get ahead and understand the context in which you're working in. And we do that on engineering and technical work, but for some reason, we don't focus as much on the social. And social presents sometimes the biggest risk because it's an unknown. So now we see mining companies, energy companies, and infrastructure companies really looking at social due diligence at the very front end of a project, so they understand the communities, which include Indigenous groups, non-Indigenous groups, government, media, and how they're going to respond to different projects. And that's important because we want meaningful engagement with people on projects. They have ownership in the project, they understand the project, and there's no outstanding variables that could cause any cancellations or delays in the project. Some of the best case examples that I've seen to build trust don't start with a project description right away, but rather go into community 2 years before a project description is developed. A community doesn't want to think that they are the last person that you're speaking to. A community wants to know that they're giving feedback into the project development and design 2 years before you've decided what the project is. Now, the balance of that is expectations. And so if you decide that you don't have a final investment decision, and then you've set expectations with community that a project is happening, those need to be equally managed. So when you're building trust with community, I would suggest that that needs to happen long before the project is fully developed and fully conceptualized, but you really need to balance that with expectations with community that you're still in a project concept phase. You haven't fully decided what that project is going to be. And that builds trust between community and company because you're allowing the participation of community to have impact and influence on how you design it. Generally, there's 4 different areas that we step into. First is identifying social risks. So what are your social risks that you are entering in when you enter into a certain jurisdiction? That could be things like legal compliance, regulatory compliance, but it can also be things like precedents that are set by different mining companies in the jurisdiction. Perhaps there are concerns that have already been brought up by communities. All of these things are encompassed in a social risk assessment evaluation. That's the first step. The second step is how do we put that into play so that we have a good plan and we can use those social risks to have a catered stakeholder engagement plan, a catered inclusion plan, which includes workforce development, procurement and contracts, possibly equity share and arrangements. The third phase that we go into is actual execution of that meaningful engagement. How can we identify the local benefits that are aligned with the corporate culture of a mining company, but then also aligned with what the community expects and how they expect to be involved? And the fourth part of it, which is kind of unique for community engagement and social performance practice, is that we have an engineering arm on our own, and we develop for Indigenous communities predominantly, or rural communities that are impacted by projects, ways that they can advance their own social agenda.